with the decrees or commands they are given. That's what duress is. It's someone saying to you, you will comply to my decrees or commands, or I threaten you with violence if you don't comply. That's the condition of duress. When people are held in the condition of duress, they are unlawfully, and I mean unlawfully not by man's law, but by natural law, prevented from exercising their free will to engage in rights which they actually possess, and or they are coerced through threats of violence to perform behaviors against their free will. Meaning if they don't do something, violence will be conducted upon them. Or if they do something that the masters tell them they must not do, violence will be conducted upon them, even if that behavior is one of their rights. That is what duress is. That's what duress always has been. That's what duress always will be. And every single individual in this room, listening on video, and in the entire world, is living in the condition of duress, whether they know it or not. I am under duress. You are all under duress. Every person here is living in a state of continuous duress. And there is no one on this planet that has the right to hold anyone in the condition of duress. And every person held under the condition of duress has the right to end that condition immediately upon its beginning, by whatever means necessary to end it. That is our natural law right, our birthright. So why do people make the distinction between people who put other people in duress as common thug criminals or mafia types, robbing people directly on the street, or demanding protection money to allow them to keep operating a business? They separate those people from the people who are saying, you can't exercise this right without my approval. Or if we find you doing this particular behavior that we told you can't do, we're going to come and shoot you or strangle you or do other kinds of violence unto you. Yet our society somehow is so brainwashed we make this distinction. We think that one group of people is not holding someone in duress, namely the police and the military and the government officials, and yet the common street thug or the common mafia enforcer is holding people in duress without right. Well, news flash, everyone, there's no difference between the states of duress in these images. Because if you believe certain people have rights that other people believe, you don't understand truth, you don't understand morality, and you don't understand natural law. Every one of these instances in this slide is a criminal act that the person has no right to perform as an individual. So what's the difference between a police officer and a strong-arm mafia enforcer? Nothing. There is no difference between them. They are both common criminals. They are both members of gangs, and I would have been that word to say they are both members of cults who do not question orders or think for themselves. They both initiate violence to enforce policy. Both have a code of secrecy, a lack of transparency, and both cite the institution's policies for the violence that they manifest in reality. They are ultimately responsible for their behaviors, yet they want to somehow abdicate themselves of that responsibility by saying, oh, the politicians ordered me to do it. The lawmakers ordered me to do it. It doesn't matter who tells you to do something that's wrong. If you did it, you're responsible for the harm. So, we look at mafia crime, right? And this is big in where I come from. South Philly's a mafia stronghold. Almost everybody I know knows somebody that's been involved at some point or another in mob syndicates. So let me ask you a question. They're all identified with the gang, the mafia, the mob. Does that mean that the person who's the bag man running drugs or running number tickets or, taking bets or something like that, isn't identifying with the same gang as the person who actually conducts a hit. You could argue, well, one's exercising one level of violence that's very high, and yet the other is simply on the team that's condoning that violence. They may not be performing an act like the ones at the bottom, but nonetheless, they're condoning it because they're on the same team and they're still helping the people who are doing that. You know what that's called? It's called a complicit gang member. Or, I would word it, a complicit cult member. They're just as complicit. The lower level people involved who are supporting the institution that runs their behavior are just as complicit as the murderers in that institution. That's the same thing with any institution. You could look at normal common street gangs. I mean, this is big on the West Coast with a lot of gangs. It's big in Chicago with gangs. New York, to an extent as well. Philadelphia gangs are a little bit to a lesser extent, but major U.S. cities have problems with gangs. Okay? Now, we will look at their actions and say, well, hey, what about the lower ranking gang member who is just out, selling a couple of bags of cocaine on the corner? Well, they're still identified and are a lower level member of a gang that's conducting violence. They're conducting this violence for territory. They're conducting this violence for the right to operate within the region that they're operating in. Hence why it's called a gang. They control territory that they operate in and try to keep anybody out from that territory. It doesn't matter what level of involvement they have. They're involved with a gang that is violent, and therefore they are complicit in the violence that is backed by this gang. Well, that's one thing. Yeah, exactly. The people who are actually doing organized crime, no one thinks they have a right to do this organized crime. Correct. No one would think, hey, the gang members have this right, the mafia has this right. You wouldn't think that. Yet people believe government has these rights to conduct violence upon people. So again, you look at some of these behaviors that are conducted by the cult of ultimate evil, namely the segment of that cult called the police. Look at the kind of violence they conduct. Throwing a paralyzed man out of a wheelchair because he didn't stand up upon command. Ripping a school child out of a desk violently, almost breaking their neck by turning their chair over backwards. Pepper spraying student protesters in the face with 2 million Scoville pepper spray. Kicking a handcuffed woman in the back of the head with a round kick. That's a big man right there, boy. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what that is. A fucking coward. That's exactly what that is. Let me tell you something, folks. These are the tame examples of police brutality in this country. Tame examples. Now, you look at the desk guy with the happy smile on his face. Oh, and notice the stormtrooper in front of him. He thinks that's one of the people he should be, modeling his behavior upon. Yeah. But what is that? What is that paper pusher in the cult of ultimate evil? He is a complicit gang member. That's what he is. Just like the bag man in the mob, just like the lower level gang member selling some cocaine on the corner. Doesn't matter what your level of complicity in the violence is. You're complicit in the violence. These people are destroyed at a soul level. They're husks. They are spiritually dead husks. People will say, oh, Mark, you're dehumanizing people. No, I'm trying to tell you how spiritually destroyed a human being can become. And you know what? We have to understand, not all of them are going to be able to be reached with words. Not all of them. We may be able to reach many. That's what our job is to do. I'm saying we have to step up the effort more to reach people with reason and words and morality, an understanding of morality. But there are some who are destroyed beyond the ability to reverse their course. They're dedicated to evil. whether they even understand that their behavior is evil or not, because that's what a cult does. It makes their membership completely identified with their position in the cult. And then they just say, I'm in this far, I'm all the way in. And no one's going to convince me that I was wrong. See, this is thankfully, thank all of creation that I was able to extricate myself from when I was involved in the cult that I was involved in, namely the dark occult, Satanism. Finally, I was able to be reached with language and reason and persuasion. I also had to practically ruin my life and almost die. That's how hard-headed I was. And then I think I was that hard-headed. There are people who make me look like a light case of the ego. A light case. You know? So I'm trying to explain to people, you have to understand what we're really up against spiritually. How deadened certain people are spiritually. It's going to take Herculean, monumental efforts to try to mentally and spiritually reform these people. That's what the great work is. I'm not saying this to make you depressed about it. We have to know what the task is. We have to know it definitively, honestly, and accurately, or we're not going to get this job done. Again, these are the modern so-called house slaves. Now, what the house slaves of the American Civil War era period were, tragically what they were, as violent and immoral and completely and utterly wrong as the practice of slavery was being performed in this country, you have to understand there were people who were taken from their native lands, and because they were given a little bit more privilege, they beat and whipped and kept the other slaves in line that were often family members, parts of their tribal groups, etc. You'll look in these images, there are slaves with weapons in their hands, threatening the other slaves who are non-compliant with the master's demands. They're willing to do this to their own people for a little bit extra food or a warmer blanket, or instead of to sleep, in the elements in a field, in a crop field, to sleep in a dog house in a crop field. Literally. You see some of them with guns, holding guns while the others are in chains. I mean, this is a special kind of psychopath. This is a special kind of immoral human being. Instead of trying to do something to end the condition for all of them, they took up the side of the master. And this is what the modern police forces are. And the modern militaries are. And in every country in the world. It doesn't matter. It's not just this country, everywhere on earth. That's what this cult of ultimate evil actually is. They are slaves themselves conducting slavery upon other slaves. And they don't even want to be free. There's a special place in hell for the house slave. There's a special place in hell. Whether you believe in hell or not, I'm talking about there is a special place of spiritual torment that is reserved in the hearts and minds of people who do jobs like that. The order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver, because their excuse is, I'm just following my orders, like the Nazis said at Nuremberg. Their excuse is, well, that's the law and I don't make it, I just enforce it. I'm just doing my job. They bear more moral responsibility than the person telling them to take the action. Because the order follower is the one who performs the behavior. And in taking that action, they actually bring the resultant harm into physical manifestation in the world. Order following is the pathway to every form of evil and chaos in our world. It should never be seen as a virtue by anyone who considers themselves a moral human being. Order followers have ultimately been personally responsible and morally culpable for every form of slavery and every single totalitarian regime that has ever existed upon the face of this planet. And get as offended about that as you like, those listening out in the internet world, but nothing will make that statement untrue. Nothing will make this one untrue either. If you did it, you are ultimately responsible, not whoever told you to do it. The excuse that I was ordered to do this immoral behavior by someone else is no excuse at all and should never be accepted as an excuse by anyone with a conscience. Now, I'm going to get into a section that some even here today may find difficult. Okay? Now, I'm going to refute the notion that is popularly held that people have the right to, quote unquote, believe whatever they want to believe. And I'm here to tell everybody here and everybody listening, wherever they're listening from, we do not have the right to believe everything we want to believe. There are beliefs that are not rights. Okay? There are beliefs that are not rights. Now let me qualify this first by explaining the difference between a thought and a belief. Everyone can think anything they want, which means for a time you are holding something in your mind to consider it. This is a thought. I'm not suggesting thought police. Okay? What I'm saying is, since we have the capacity to reason through our thoughts, when you come to a completely erroneous, immoral, and incorrect conclusion by using your thoughts, and then you harden and compress and harden those thoughts into a belief structure, that is when they cross the line between thought and belief system. I'm trying to explain to people that not every belief system is a right. Thoughts are rights that we all possess, but we do not have the right to, in perpetuity, continuously believe certain things, which are wrong and immoral. Contrary to popular disinformation and widely held but erroneous belief, as human beings, we do not possess the right to believe whatever we want to believe. We possess the right to believe whatever we want to believe, even if those beliefs are wildly out of touch with reality, only if those beliefs do not condone violence against or support the slavery of other beings. That's the kinds of beliefs we have. So I'll give an example. Do you have the right to believe that there are pink and purple striped unicorns wandering through the air at any given moment? Yeah, you have the right to believe that. You want to know why? That's not violent toward other people. That's why you can believe that nonsense. Okay? That's why I don't have a problem with most religious beliefs. I may think that they are nonsense myself, but as long as they are not condoning or supporting the commission of violence and slavery against other people, believe whatever the hell you want. Where I have a moral problem with it, rightly so, is when someone else believes I'm somebody's rightful slave. Or anyone else is anyone's rightful slave. Now I have a big moral problem with that. That's not a right. No one has that right to even believe that in perpetuity, in a continued state of thought. We can consider the notion of slavery by thinking about it, but if we don't come to the correct moral conclusion that it is immoral, wrong, and should never be practiced and should be immediately ended, the belief that it's okay to perpetrate it is wrong. It's a wrongdoing. Because you are actually condoning the actions that continue this immoral behavior. Would people in the southern colonies have had the right to continue to believe that the practice of owning black slaves in the South was a right? That wasn't one of their rights. Even if they didn't own slaves themselves. How many people owned slaves in the Civil War era period? And when slaves escaped from the forced labor camps called plantations they were forced to work on, when they escaped, the person would have tried to capture them and bring them back into captivity. Because they believed that this was a legitimate condition of owning other people. They had no right, Not only to do those behaviors, but to even believe in the legitimacy of the condition of slavery. No such right exists. And never has. Sorry, let me go back a slide. To believe government is legitimate is to believe that slavery is legitimate. And that is not a right. We can consider the notion of government through our thoughts, but when we erroneously come to the incorrect conclusion and harden that into a belief system, that becomes a violent belief. The people who believe that slavery is legitimate through government are not within their rights. They are not within their rights to continue to believe that slavery is legitimate for anyone. Unfortunately, in the modern world, people don't understand the distinction. They think there's some sort of a distinction. They don't understand that they're the same thing, government and slavery. Government is slavery. If stealing 100% of the product of someone else's labor is slavery, at what percentage does it become not slavery? This question was originally, I ask this question all the time, but this question was actually originally posed by Frederick Douglass, a slave who escaped his captivity in the South and eventually went to Europe because he was under such duress of being captured and brought back into slavery in the southern states when he moved to the northern states. That he had to actually go over the ocean to where at least black slavery wasn't practiced at the time. Although they're in the other kind of slavery called the belief in a king and queen, called royalty. Slavery works better in the modern world because now people don't even know that they're slaves through mind control and mental conditioning and calling it a euphemized term called government and authority. Here's the bottom line when it comes to belief systems, folks. As difficult even as it may be for some people in this room even to get this concept, no one has the right to believe that people are property. In addition to that, no one has the right to believe that slavery is legitimate for anyone. And now, I'm going to take it a step further. Really pay attention to this one. Because here's where people are really in wrong belief who are refusing to get this message and wake up. No one has the right to believe that slavery is legitimate for anyone, including themselves. This is a big thing you hear even in the freedom movement. Well, if other people want to be slaves, that's their right. No, it's not. No, it's not. No one has the right to believe that they are rightful slaves. Do you want to know why? That belief perpetuates the belief in the legitimacy of slavery, which is also not a right. You don't have a right to believe that you're the legitimate slave of another being. There is no such right in nature. Never has been. We have to abandon this erroneous notion that somehow government is legitimate and a ruling class and a slave class is legitimate through the idea of authority. This erroneous notion. And I think Samuel Adams, again, who is my heart and soul of a dissident. Samuel Adams, who rode on horseback from Boston to Philadelphia to speak at the Pennsylvania State House and urge for a physical rebellion against the tyranny of the crown. Without that man doing that, the American Revolution may have never happened. And I'll tell you something, it's probably the closest thing to a divinely inspired holy act that has ever taken place on this planet. And the people who don't understand what happened in the American Revolution, I feel sorry for them for believing in revisionist history, which I'm going to talk about. Because we need to understand what exactly happened here in the Revolutionary War era period and understand the type of blood sacrifice that, thank God, the men who were willing to give that blood conducted. Because they made it possible for someone like me to stand here and speak these words today. we would be bending over and kissing the ass of a king or queen. And most of us still are, except it's called government now. Well, let me tell you something. Without those men, these ideas wouldn't have propagated in this land to the extent that they did. We owe them a debt. I know the significance of their actions, of their minds and of their actions, because I've read their philosophy, which most people have never done. Samuel Adams, the chief conspirator of the American Revolution, said, "It is the greatest absurdity to suppose it in the power of one or any number of men to renounce their essential natural rights or the means of preserving those rights," which we're going to talk about a little bit later. If men, through fear, fraud, or mistake, should in terms renounce or give up an essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the grand end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. He is saying here, you don't have a right to give up your rights, because that puts everybody else in jeopardy of slavery. You have no right not to understand what a right is. You have a right to not understand how to bake an apple pie, but you don't have a right to not understand what a right is. This is something that is a duty to understand. It transcends a right. You must understand it, because the ignorance of its understanding places other beings in jeopardy of slavery. And he's saying if somebody says, "I'm the rightful slave of another," the society itself simply vacates that abdication of a right and says, "No, you do not have a right to abdicate that." It's not only a right, it's a duty and a responsibility that you can never shirk, actually, in nature. You can only make the claim that you're going to shirk it, but you can't really do that. Continuing with this quote, he said, "The right of freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave." That's why they don't want people reading the Founding Fathers' writings. They might get some crazy ideas that they're free and not owned by others, and don't have a right to renounce their freedom. That wild idea might break out, and freedom along with it. Yeah, they don't want you reading these man's writings. Certainly not. That's why they're going to pull them from school, and that's why they're going to propagate these Marxists, these neo-Marxists, and these absolutely outright communist ideas that somehow these were evil men. And the people who buy into this psyop don't know their history at all. At all. Contrary to popular disinformation and widely held but erroneous belief, as human beings, we do not possess the right to be apathetic about whatever we want. This notion that I don't care whether we are enslaved is also not a right. You have a right not to care whatever popular celebrity of the day, what fashion they happen to be wearing. Because I certainly don't care about those things. And that's my right not to care about them. I personally don't care about what's happening in popular sports or popular music. Couldn't give a damn, couldn't care less. I don't have the right not to care about the dynamics that govern human freedom. I don't have that right. Why? Because refusing to understand it is putting other beings in jeopardy of slavery. There is no such right not to understand our rights or say, we don't care. I don't care what a right is. I don't care whether society is enslaved. My own grandmother on my father's side of the family looked at me in the face one day and said, "I know that we're all enslaved and I don't care." I'm like, you have to be kidding me. I said, how many children do you have? 2. How many grandchildren do you have? 2. How many great-grandchildren do you have? 1. I said, you have 2 children, 2 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild, and you don't care whether the world is enslaved? And you think that's your right not to care? I mean, you have to be kidding me. That the people like this exist within our own families. No one has the right to not care that slavery is continuing and that freedom is being destroyed. This is not a right that exists in nature. Again, you have a right not to care about any frivolous thing that you don't want to care about, but you don't have a right not to care about rights and freedom. It's a duty and a responsibility that you can never shirk in nature. There's also complicity in evil and slavery through silence. Contrary to popular disinformation and widely held but erroneous belief, as human beings, we do not possess the right to remain silent about whatever we want. This is complicity by saying, even if absolute immoral, violent behavior is conducted and I know it's wrong, I'm going to sit back and do nothing, not even speak about its wrongness. And that's not a right. If I sit back and watch a perpetual condition of duress and slavery take place in my midst, and I don't speak out against it, I am by my non-action partaking in a complicit act with evil. I am condoning by my silence and apathy the evil that's being conducted. And that's not a right. So this is hard for some people to hear because a lot of people say, well, a wrong can only be an action conducted. No, it's not that simple. You can perform wrong in your thoughts and in your emotions and in your non-actions. Wrongdoings can be performed. So even this crowd needs to explore this dynamic more and understand this dynamic more. And I understand this is going to be controversial even in our circles. We possess the right to be silent about whatever we want only if that silence does not diminish the rights and freedoms of others. In other words, it is not a right to remain silent about the ongoing condition of human slavery. Not a right. By passively accepting evil and remaining silent, we are participating in the evil. Those who through their silence allow evil to be done unchallenged are just as immoral as those who are doing it. And the meme here that I found on the internet says, when freedom is at stake, your silence is not golden, it's yellow. See, that's where we find most of our friends and family members. Some of my friends and family members will say, oh yeah, I recognize this is going on, but I want no part in exposing it. I want no part in talking about it. You know, that's called being a coward. And being a coward is a bad person. Because we are already at war. And I'm not just talking about a spiritual or mental war. We are already at physical war. Physical war is being conducted upon the people of this country and the world. Now here's the actual result, folks. Here's the actual numbers. Think about this number in a war. The media would be all over it. Over 10,000 Americans alone have now been summarily executed without trial on the streets of America since the massive 9/11 false flag ritual by the standing army invasion force known as the American police. And I put the word American in double quotes because they are nothing of the kind. They are trash, un-American, order-following vermin. And I'll say it to their face. 10,000 lives gone with no trial. That's called public executions. Yet we don't call it that. We euphemize it. And people who are complicit with this behavior condone it. That's who lives among us. Dirty, rotten Tories who would have supported the British Crown and their henchmen during the American Revolutionary era period. They're no different than those Tories. This is the standing army invasion force that the founding fathers warned us about. A standing army was repeatedly told to the public by the founding fathers and American revolutionaries that if you let a standing army rise up in your midst, all around you, you will have tyranny. And that's exactly what we allowed to happen. And this is who they are. This is a foreign invasion standing army force. That's the standing army the founding fathers warned us about in all of their writings. And they said, that's the force that you're going to have to prevent from rising up in this country, and you're going to have to do it by maintaining a well-regulated militia, which I've talked about ad infinitum on my podcast series and in my Second Amendment presentation, which everybody should fully understand, especially in these times when it's coming under attack again because of these nonsense false flag ritual killing events. Samuel Adams, once again, I'm going to have a lot of quotes from the founding fathers in this presentation. He said, if you love wealth, he said this in Philadelphia, if you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animating contest for freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. You know, I say this before every one of my band shows. That's the intro to our performance. I restate Samuel Adams' words before we start to play.